Eagles Entertainment.
Welcome to the Eagles Insider Podcast, presented by Lincoln Financial Group. Hello, Eagles everywhere. I'm Eagles Insider Dave Spadaro. It's Tuesday, January 19th. And who will the Eagles hire as their next head coach? We've certainly heard a lot of names. Everyone from Todd Bowles, Joe Brady. How about Josh McDaniels? The Eagles have covered this from top to bottom. And as I speak, only two teams without a head coach, the Eagles and the Houston Texans. Eric Bieniemy among those interviewed, Deuce Staley among those interviewed. It has been an extensive list as the Eagles have been doing their business from Florida, from Jeffrey Lurie's home. And, well, it could happen any moment. As we know, it works in this business. Things happen quickly in the NFL. As the AFC Championship game and the NFC Championship game are close, Buffalo at Kansas City, Tampa Bay at Green Bay, the Eagles trying to get this coaching hire in place. And then, of course, after that, there is the process of hiring the entire staff. So a lot of work to do as the Eagles not only are doing that, but preparing for the NFL draft. April 29th. The Eagles have the 6th pick in the first round, potentially 10 selections in all. Prior to that, free agency. How much can the Eagles do in free agency with what has been described as a very challenging salary cap situation? And of course, the roster itself, many, many questions, headlined by the quarterback position. So we will keep you up to date here on the Eagles Insider Podcast, presented by Lincoln Financial Group, as the news breaks, and it could be any day now. Who will the next head coach be? In the meantime, thought it would be kind of fun to get my buddy Merrill Reese back on here and talk about the 4 previous hires that Jeffrey Lurie has made in his time as the Eagles owner. He's hired 4 head coaches. 1 from the defensive side of the ball. That's Rhodes. And then 3 from the offensive side of the ball. Andy Reid, Chip Kelly, Doug Pederson. All 4 started as head coaches in the NFL with the Philadelphia Eagles. Will that be the case in 2021? We'll find out shortly. In the meantime, let's hear from Merrill as we take a little trip down memory lane and talk about the 4 head coaches that Jeffrey Lurie has hired since 1995.
Merrill, Jeffrey Lurie, at some point here, will hire his 5th head coach. Now, we've both been there for the previous 4 head coaches. So I wanted to kind of go back and just think about, if we can recall, a little trip down memory lane here, what it was like prior to Jeffrey hiring Rhodes, and then Andy Reid, Chip Kelly, Doug Peterson, and then kind of how we feel about their tenures. So let's begin back in 1994. Jeffrey takes over the team. Rich Kotite is 7-2 and looking for a contract extension. Of course, that season went right down the tube. 7 straight losses. Eagles go 7-9.
And right after Rich Kotite said, "My record stands for itself."
Yeah, exactly. And he lost 7 straight games. Yep. So an interesting transition there. What do you remember about the period of time as we waited to see what Jeffrey Lurie would do and the state of the Philadelphia Eagles at that time?
Well, I do remember something very, very interesting, that the Eagles' last game of the season was in Cincinnati, and rumors were abounding and headlines were being written that Dick Vermeil was about to become the Eagles' next head coach. They were very, very close to signing Dick Vermeil. There were meetings, people were celebrating, and then all of a sudden there was a disconnect between Dick Vermeil and, I assume, Joe Banner.
So how do you? I mean, I would imagine you would have been very excited to see Dick Vermeil come back to Philadelphia.
Absolutely, the most charismatic coach I've ever been around.
Instead, it was Rhodes, Merrill, and a defensive-minded coach, a tough talker. I really liked my initial impression of Ray. I felt that his no-nonsense ways, his San Francisco 49ers ties, the young coaching staff he put together with John Gruden as the offensive coordinator, I thought the Eagles were on the right road. And as it turned out, they were for a while.
They were for a while. I mean, they made the playoffs. They won a playoff game against the Lions. I like Ray Rhodes a lot. Will always like Ray Rhodes a lot, but something went wrong along the way, and then we found out that scowl that Ray had really didn't have much behind it, that he was too nice to the players, and a lot of guys took advantage of his former player type of demeanor. Ray was a great guy, but eventually it ended disastrously here. But I'll tell you, there was never a nicer person who coached this team.
I guess, Merrill, I remember feeling like if the Eagles could have gotten an answer at quarterback, maybe it would have worked out. But it was an odd time with Ray and, Randall Cunningham in a weird position, right? It was like
Randall
Bobby
was
Hoying.
declining. Randall was having a lot of problems, and Ray didn't want to, but he replaced him with Rodney Peete. And that's how they ended up with Rodney Peete winning the playoff game against the Lions. But listen, Ray was a good man. He was a good man. But you're right, the quarterback instability had a great deal to do with it.
Let's visit the Bobby Hoying story, because he was enthralling at the end of the tenure there in 1997.
I'm going to take some blame, because I said to Ray Rhodes midway through that season, we did a show every Monday night. If you watch this quarterback from Ohio State, Bobby Hoying, and Ray said, Bobby Hoying. That's all you talked about, Bobby Hoying. So Ray called me from, I don't know if did they have the combine then, or the senior?
Yeah, I think they did. Yeah, for sure.
It might have even been the Senior Bowl. But Ray called me at home, and he called me and he said, I think it was the Senior Bowl. He said, I watched your quarterback, and he can play. That's all he said. That's all. I watched your quarterback, and he can play. And then the next draft comes, and lo and behold, not a first-round pick, but he ends up drafting Bobby Hoying. Bobby Hoying looked very good in camp. And at one point, he looked better than any quarterback at camp. Didn't get his chance until late in the season against Baltimore. And after his game against Baltimore, it ended in a tie, but he played very, very well. John Gruden came to me and said, we should have played, they called him my quarterback, we should have played your quarterback sooner. And then the next week, I believe he had the great game back at the vet against Cincinnati, where he outdueled Boomer Esiason. And the next day, the headlines were Hoy, H-O-Y, Hoy to the world. Those were the headlines in the Daily News. And he won a game over Pittsburgh, then had a couple of less impressive games, but it was going to be Bobby Hoying's team going forward. And then what happened, miraculously, if they came back to the next camp, Bobby had come off in the off season. He had a case of appendicitis, and there was an infection involved. So he came back to camp weak. And not only that, they put him behind a worse offensive line than what the Eagles had this season. I mean, they couldn't block, and they gave him no wide receivers of any note. And Bobby spent most of the time looking up at the sky from a prone position. Of course, the following year they drafted Donovan McNabb, and that was the end of Bobby Hoying. He went on to, but John Gruden grabbed him right away and brought him out to Oakland, and there he suffered an elbow injury and had Tommy John surgery. And Bobby is now a successful commercial real estate guy in Columbus, Ohio. But I still believe that Bobby Hoying, and I refuse to give up on this notion, I still believe that Bobby Hoying could have been not a Hall of Fame quarterback, but a solid NFL quarterback if things had worked out right.
Yeah, and it didn't help that Gruden left to become the head coach out west, and then Dana Bible came in as the offensive coordinator, and really didn't make it through the preseason before the Eagles brought in Bill Musgrave. And
one of the great lines I have ever heard a reporter have was Mark Eckel, who wrote for the Trenton Times, wrote, "They hired Dana Bible and didn't have a prayer."
Exactly. Yeah, that was very good. So I'll remember the Ray Rhodes era for a couple of things, Merrill. I'll remember for the draft selection of Mike Mamula, his first draft. He moved up to get Mike Mamula, and Warren Sapp was on the board. I'll remember that victory over the Detroit Lions because I remember one of their offensive linemen, Lomas Brown, had guaranteed a victory, and instead the Eagles...
the fans chanted, Lomas, Lomas!
Yes. And just a blowout at Veterans Stadium. And then I'll remember the playoff loss.
I got a question for you, Dave Spadaro. Who threw that? Rodney Peete threw a Hail Mary pass at the end of the first half, threw it half the length of the field. Who caught it for the Eagles?
Merrill, listen, you're not dealing with an amateur here. I'm going to tell you it was Rob Carpenter.
Very good.
Thank you.
Very good. Out of Syracuse University.
That's right. Thank you. It was a great moment. And then I believe, if I'm correct, the next week, wasn't that it was Dallas the next week, and and Randall wasn't ready to play. His wife had given birth.
Well, what happened was we all went to Vero Beach and went to Dodgertown, where the Los Angeles Dodgers hold spring training, and the Eagles took over Dodgertown. And I remember that because they had a great golf course at Dodgertown. But during the week, Randall went home. He went home because his wife, Felicity, was expecting their first child. And the interesting thing was he forgot his playbook at training camp. Never even at that camp. He never took his playbook back. And then the following Friday, the Eagles had their last practice before they departed for Dallas. And after practice, Randall arrived back from wherever he had gone for the birth of his first child. So that didn't go over particularly well. Eagles flew into Dallas. They played a horrible game. Rodney Peete was the starting quarterback, and he got hurt. And the press box announcer said on the PA, Rodney Peete leaving the game, he's been dinged. And in came Randall Cunningham, and one of the Philadelphia writers yelled out, they haven't seen dinged yet. and Randall came out there with no playbook behind him. I think he was calling his high school plays, and it was a disaster from there on. And what made it worse is we were trapped in Dallas for 3 days because the airport was closed in Philadelphia because of a snowstorm.
Yeah, exactly right. I remember spending a lot of time in the hotel bar BSing with everybody during that trip. That was a lot of fun. So and then the other thing
I remember going to the mall because I was running out of underwear.
That's right. There was a mall across the street. And then of course the next year Eagles go back to the playoffs in San Francisco. Just the offense falling apart. You kind of knew that the end of the era was you can kind of feel it wearing down, and we'll talk about that with the other three coaches too. But
do you remember the quarterback who finished the game?
Was it Ty Detmer?
Nope.
Who was it?
Mark Rippon.
Oh, Mark Rippon. Oh boy. Okay.
Mark Rippon finished the game in San Francisco.
I'm 1 for 2. Maybe Ty started the game. I don't know. I'm 1 for 2 then in the Merrill Reese trivia contest here. So then Merrill, then the Eagles, then it's Jeffrey Lurie and Joe Banner embark on a second coaching search in 1999, and they end up with a somebody who nobody had ever heard of, Andy Reid. Here is Jeffrey Lurie talking about Andy Reid as he introduced him to the Philadelphia media.
Well, today the turnaround begins. Philadelphia Eagles are extremely, extremely excited to announce the hiring of Andy Reid as our head coach. I can't tell you as an organization how happy we are. Pieces fell into the puzzle and just things went well for us. And I think we're all extremely gratified to be able to corral Andy, to bring such a guy with such leadership ability, such integrity, such sense of organizational responsibility, and such football acumen to Philadelphia. And anyway, I just want to, very proud to welcome Andy Reid as our new head coach.
Well, thank you very much. I'm tremendously happy to be part of the Philadelphia Eagles. What a great organization, what great tradition. Again, the sky's the limit here, and I honestly believe that. I know that the management's going in the right direction. This obviously is the first step to putting the Philadelphia Eagles back on the map and again, continuing this great tradition.
Okay, Merrill, what were your early impressions of Andy Reid?
Well, can I tell you something first? Something leading up to that was different than what has ever happened before or since. Different candidates would come to the event, and they would make them available to the media after they spoke with Jeffrey Lurie. I mean, I remember one of them was Dom Capers. He was in. Jim Haslett, he was in. And after they would meet with the owner, they'd come down and have a press conference and let us question the candidates. And Andy Reid came in, and we all talked to Andy Reid. And somebody wrote that he reminded them a lot of Mike Holmgren, even in appearance. And of course, that was the coach they hired, the quarterback coach of the Green Bay Packers. And what a great decision that was.
And Merrill, I remember at that opening press conference, we heard from Jeffrey Lurie. Now let's hear from Andy Reid, some of the things that he said back then about his past of bringing this West Coast offense to Philadelphia and just having a plan in place to win big in Philadelphia. That is exactly what he did.
I have confidence in myself, and I think I'm able to give this organization the offense that has won a tremendous amount of rings in the National Football League. And you all in Philadelphia have had a taste of that. And then my organizational skills, I feel, will also benefit the football operations part of this.
Merrill, what a great run for 14 years with Andy Reid. I mean, to me, the only crime is that the Eagles didn't win the Super Bowl during that time. Otherwise, 5 NFC championship games, great success. Organization was top-notch. He had good success in the draft, and the Eagles were always prepared.
They were. I thought there were some organizational mistakes at the end. Andy went through a tragic time with his sons getting into trouble, and ultimately with Gary dying of an overdose. And it was a tumultuous time, and I don't think Andy had his head clear enough to do the job we were accustomed to with Andy. And I think they made a big mistake, and I believe that it came from the front office, and not with Andy's approval, of letting go of somebody by the name of Sean McDermott, who had followed the late Jim Johnson into the defensive coordinator's role. And they fired Sean McDermott after a less than satisfying season, and Andy gave them Juan Castillo as the next defensive coordinator. Now, Juan Castillo was one of the most successful and popular offensive line coaches. You talk to Trey Thomas, you talk to guys who played with him, and they say he's the best offensive line coach they've ever played with. But he was not a defensive coordinator, and they threw him into that job, and it was an abject failure. And the next year at the bye, they finally fired him and gave the job to Todd Bowles to be the defensive coordinator. But at that point, Andy had a bad season, and Jeffrey said, I thought about changing, but we'll give him one more, and that was even worse. And at this point, the Eagles needed a new coach, and Andy Reid needed a new city, and has he been successful ever since?
No question. It's always tough to see it end, but I mean, Merrill, your relationship with Andy and what you learned about football and about running a football organization and being a head coach of a team. To me, much of what I believe about football, it comes from Andy Reid in those years. The Eagles were always in the game.
Well, I had an early initiation to Andy, which was not all that favorable. We did our first Andy Reid show, a Monday night show at camp, where we were supposed to take questions from listeners, phone calls, And the first caller called up and said to Andy, I figured out your problem. Your jockey shorts are on too tight. Well, that didn't go over real well. So then Andy decided that the questions had to be edited and pre-recorded. And then a couple of weeks in, he turned to people in the office and said that Merrill Reese, was too negative, and that he needed to have somebody else come in and do the show along with me, because I was far too negative. Andy didn't like the fact that when we played the highlights of the game from the previous day, that we would play all the highlights, Eagles highlights and Giants highlights or Cowboys highlights, and put it together like a synopsis, a short synopsis of the game. He thought that we could only play good Eagles plays. we could not play the opposition. And I am somebody who certainly loves the Eagles and wants the Eagles to win, but I wasn't adverse to saying to Andy, why did your offensive line struggle so much yesterday? Or, Andy, are you concerned about the breakdowns in the secondary? Andy didn't want those kind of questions. So they brought in Don Tollefson to do the show with me, thinking that he could keep me in check. So, but our relationship fortunately grew after that. We became very, very close. And I love Andy Reid. He's a great man. And to this day, we text back and forth regularly.
Merrill, after Andy left, the Eagles went the college route for the first time, the only time. And they brought in the flashiness of Chip Kelly and that Oregon offense. And, oh, boy, this was going to be fun. And for that first season, certainly that first game when the Eagles opened up against Washington, and, oh, boy, was that a whole lot of fun, some of the highlights of that game.
Peterson, 85's at the bottom. Eagles bring 5. It's picked up, and Griffin's pass is intercepted. Diving catch by Kerry Williams. Went to the ground, maintained possession, and it's another Redskin turnover, their third of the night. So few last year, 3 already, and Vic gets away from a would-be sack by Arakpo. Heading for the sideline, going to be a 4-yard loss, and they go down like bowling pins on that Washington sideline. Bakari Rambo took out a whole bunch of folks, including Jim Howie, the head linesman. Everybody seems to be okay. Loss of 4. Off the great first half, LaShawn McCoy. What a move by McCoy. Look at McCoy. What a run. Eagle touchdown. Oh.
That'll be on.
Merrill, what did you think of Chip Kelly early on?
Well, my initial impression was great. Had the press conference. Jeffrey Lurie asked me to step forward after the press conference, and he introduced me to Chip and said, Chip, I'd like you to meet Merrill Reese. He's the best play-by-play man in the National Football League. And Chip shook my hand, and he said, Merrill, so happy to meet you. When you have a few moments, come up, stop into my office. I'd love to pick your brain and hear your stories. So about a week later, Derek Boyko, the Eagles PR director, told me that Chip was not busy at the moment. Come on up. So he took me up to Chip's office. As I came through the door, Chip jumped up out of his desk, ran over to where I was at the door, shook my hand and said, hi, patted me on the back and sent me on my way. He could care less about anything I had to say. And that was the height of my relationship with Chip Kelly. But somebody once told me that you can't win with schemes, because if you're a great defensive coach like Buddy Ryan and you have a 46 defense, give the offensive coordinators one off season and they'll be able to figure that defense out and be able to operate against it. Same thing with the offenses. You can have a wide open West Coast offense. You can have anything you want, a spread offense. But if the defensive coordinators have an off season, they'll figure that one out too. You have to have communication. You have to have organization. You have to have motivation, and you have to have execution. And put all those things together, and you can win. But poor communication was what I think about when I think of Chip Kelly, and he never got through to the team.
Yeah, and the offense never evolved after that first year. But actually, they won the NFC East the first year. It went to 9-3 in year number 2, and then it all fell apart very quickly, and Jeffrey
if you look at the end, see, people will look at that second season and say, hey, they had a pretty good record, even though they didn't make the playoffs. But you know what? If you take that post-Thanksgiving season, where they had the great Thanksgiving Day in Dallas, and then you go to the rest of the games after that and take it through its final game in Washington, you'll see that the Eagles were a disaster under Chip Kelly.
And they were blown out in games, and fans were leaving early, and it was just absolutely horrible. Okay, so then
I said something. The worst of all, the most embarrassing of all, was on national television in its final season in Detroit on Thanksgiving Day, and that's the marquee game. And I remember saying, ladies and gentlemen, mercifully, the thing I am most thankful for on this holiday is that there are only 3 minutes and 12 seconds left in this game.
And very true. So what was interesting about that transition, Merrill, the Eagles relieved Chip Kelly of his duties with 1 game to go in the regular season. Pat Shurmur becomes the interim head coach. And for a while there, as the Eagles beat the Giants, we all felt that Pat Shurmur had a very good chance to win the job. And there was a lot of lobbying for Pat Shurmur. And instead, the Eagles made the announcement, and Jeffrey Lurie stepped to the podium and introduced Doug Peterson as the head coach. And here is what he had to say about Doug and the skills that he felt Doug would bring to the Philadelphia Eagles.
We started with about 25 candidates that we completely researched, analyzed, vetted, however you want to describe it. And that research started during the season, at some point late in the season, and it gave us some time to, if we needed to go this direction, be fully prepared for the search process. And the good news in the NFL is there's a lot of real good candidates. When we went from looking at 25 viable candidates, we then reduced it to about 10 candidates that we were very, very interested in, some of whom were existing head coaches on other teams waiting to see if they would be available, and creating our own top tier of candidates in addition to internal candidates. So that list ended up being about 10, 11 candidates that we were totally focused on. I have to say that the candidates we ended up interviewing were all impressive. It is a really good fortune for people to develop such young talent and multi-type of talent in the NFL, whether it's young coordinators, impressive internal candidates, very experienced head coaches in the National Football League. Very, very impressive people, smart, and really able to be very successful, I think, in the NFL. We then basically, from all the interviews, continued to analyze, research, and with all of us and our advisors, unanimously came to the conclusion that the best man for the job and the best leader in this process was Doug Pederson. The main features with Doug that really impressed all of us, and especially myself, were first, real smart, strategic thinker. Things we noticed early on in his career, but really blossomed over the last decade of coaching. He'd been, as a player and a coach, worked under coaches that really knew how to do it right, whether it's Don Shula, Mike Holmgren, Andy Reid. These were well-organized coaches that absolutely were at the forefront and are at the forefront of their profession. As a player, how he worked with our quarterbacks that he was playing with, and as coaching them as well, terrific, just terrific. Communication skills, unparalleled. A key ingredient for me, and it's, I think when you go to this, it kind of defines differences between candidates, and that is who is the most comfortable in their own skin. And when I say that, what I mean is an ability to be genuine at all times. And I got to spend a lot of time with our players at the beginning of this coaching search, and the message loud and clear, which I agree with in terms of leadership in today's world, no matter what, is You've got to be comfortable in your own skin in order to be able to reach out, be genuine with those you want to get high performance from, be accountable to them, and make them accountable to you. And when you get down to it, that's something that we were not going to go away from. That was a very key variable, and Doug has that, and unquestionably. I think that what Doug brings also is an understanding of the passion of our fans in Philadelphia. This wasn't a requirement for the job, but he understands how dedicated, obsessed we all are to bring a Super Bowl to Philadelphia. He's talked about it for years and years and years. He continues to talk about it and understands a lot of the issues of what we all want to bring to the best city in terms of football fans imaginable.
And then, Merrill, before we hear from you on this, because I know Doug is very close with both of us, Doug spoke about some of the things that he could bring to Philadelphia. Lo and behold, he did not mention a Lombardi Trophy, but he certainly did deliver that. Here is Doug Peterson on day one as the head coach of the Eagles.
I'm standing here before you just a humbled human being. There's a lot of people I want to thank, and the first people is obviously the Kansas City Chiefs, Clark Hunt and the Hunt family for giving me the opportunity to be the offensive coordinator there for 3 years. Mark Donovan, the team president, Coach Andy Reid, one of my mentors in my life. And then turn this chapter of my life back to Philadelphia. Started my career here in 1999 as a starting quarterback. Came back as a position coach with Coach Reid, and now back as the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. So with that, I want to thank Tina and Jeffrey Lurie for this opportunity. Howie Roseman, Don Smolenski, the search team, the committee, the efforts that were put forth in finding their next head coach. And last but not least, I want to thank my wife, who's here today, Jeannie. She's been my rock, my support, my inspiration for anything and everything that we've done together as a couple. Looking at the Philadelphia Eagles, what intrigued me about coming back to Philadelphia? One is an opportunity to lead young men, an opportunity to be surrounded by quality individuals, top-notch individuals, a tremendous owner, an owner that gives you the fullest of support. The players that are in this room, my challenges to them is that we're going to work every day. We're going to work hard every day. We're going to come to work every day. As coaches, it's our job to make you better. To make you better as individuals, to make you better as men, and to make you better as Philadelphia Eagles. And that's my job. It starts with me. I understand the culture and the passion of Philadelphia. I get it. I experienced that as a quarterback in 1999. I experienced that firsthand. And now coming back, I understand what it feels like to win in this city. This city hasn't won, and this organization hasn't won in quite some time. It's my job to turn that around. And you do it one day at a time. You do it one player at a time. You do it one coach at a time. So as I continue to go through the evaluation process, nothing's settled. Nothing's settled. You evaluate the team, you evaluate the coaches. You want to put the best people in place, not only for the Philadelphia Eagles, but people that are Doug Pederson people. People that I can trust, coaches that I can trust, coaches that I can trust they're doing the best things for their players, whether it be in the training room, the strength and conditioning department, the personnel department, and obviously the coaching department. And so I'm proud to announce right now, Jim Schwartz will be our defensive coordinator for the 2016 Philadelphia Eagles. And I'm excited to have him, his track record, his defenses that have led the National Football League. I've had a chance to coach against him, and I'm glad he's on our team now. And so I'm honored to have him to be a part of my staff.
Merrill, what do you remember about your initial thoughts, Doug, as the head coach?
Thrilled. Absolutely thrilled. I had known Doug by that time for 19 years. I knew him from the time Andy Reid brought him in to become the sacrificial lamb until Donovan McNabb was ready and the offensive line was ready to protect him. So Doug went out there and took a beating week after week and never complained. Always a wonderful person. And I remembered him coming back, being on Andy Reid's staff as a quarterback coach. And I remember a lot about Doug Peterson. And when he came in, I said, you know what? The words that Jeffrey Lurie used in that press conference, and I remember them as if it were yesterday, were emotional intelligence. That's what Doug Peterson had, emotional intelligence. And he was an excellent communicator, and nobody will ever convince me that Doug Peterson wasn't a very, very good head coach.
And Merrill, of course, 2017, just 2 years into his tenure, magical season, historical season, right? Like for you, I would imagine the greatest ride of your professional career.
Absolutely. Absolutely. With the championship, amazing. But you know what? Doug made every one of us feel a part of it, didn't he? His enthusiasm, his feelings spread throughout that entire building. I go back to Dick Vermeil, of course, and Dick Vermeil used to get up after every win and say, this is a testament to everybody in this building, to every secretary, to everybody. It's a combination of all of us doing our jobs. And you know what? Doug made everybody in that NovaCare building during the week feel that they were a contributor, that they were part of the Eagles' great achievement.
Yeah. And that's it. So 5 years of Doug Peterson, and we will wish him the best of luck and remember him fondly. And Merrill, as we look back at the four coaches, one defensive coach, three offensive coaches, the only common thread is that all four started their NFL head coaching careers in Philadelphia. Does that at all give you any hint as to what Jeffrey might be thinking now?
I don't know. I can tell you this. It doesn't make any difference if he comes from the offensive side of the ball or the defensive side of the ball. As long as that defensive coach brings a great offensive coordinator, or if that offensive coach brings a great defensive coordinator. I want a leader. I want somebody who can capture that locker room, inspire people, motivate, and organize. That's what a head coach has to be. X's and O's are overrated. Head coach doesn't have to be that, quote, genius. He just has to know how to tie it all together and have the right staff with him. And one other thing I remember Dick Vermeil saying, and this has to do with staffs, Dick said to be successful, a head coach has to surround himself with people good enough to take his job.
And that will do it for this Eagles Insider podcast presented by Lincoln Financial Group. Thanks to Merrill for his time. Thanks to Peter, Kelly, Trevor Hayes, Ray Doyle for their work. Thanks to all of you for joining us once again here on the Eagles Insider podcast. Sure do miss that playoff football, don't we? Well, stay with us. The Eagles are going to be hiring a head coach, and it could be very soon. If you have a moment to give us a review, the link is in the details section of your podcast library. In the meantime, everybody, I'm Eagles Insider Dave Spadaro. Thanks so much for joining. We really appreciate it. And I, just like you, anxiously awaiting the Eagles' decision for the next head coach. In the meantime, have yourselves a great Eagles day, everyone. And as always, fly, Eagles, fly.
E-A-G-L-E-S, Eagles!
Raise a glass to that comforting feeling of an Eagles touchdown with the all-new Broad & Pattison wine collection created in partnership with Wink, featuring a Cabernet, a Rosé, and a Chardonnay. Broad & Pattison wines are the perfect pairing for any occasion. Now you can bring this sweet taste of victory with you to a dinner with friends or to the tailgate with your game day crew. Purchase online today at philadelphiaeagles.com/wine to stock up and have Broad & Pattison delivered right to your door. A portion of proceeds from every bottle benefit Eagles Autism Foundation.